She called the cops on me for building a fence. Not a fence across someone's driveway, not a fence in a public park. A fence on my own dang lakefront property. That's how this whole circus started. Apparently in Maple Hollow Estates, putting up a fence for your horses is the social equivalent of starting a meth lab in your garage. And Beverly Langford, the self-declared queen of the HOA, rolled up like a pageant mom with a clipboard and a superiority complex. I hadn't even sunk my second post before her white SUV skidded into my driveway like she was filming for a reality show titled Desperate Rules for Suburban Royalty. She stepped out wearing sunglasses the size of confidence and told me I was threatening the soul of the neighborhood. The soul. All because I dared to give my horses some walking room. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you love wild, true-feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more jaw-dropping, and trust me, the surprises coming next, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's rewind for a second. I'd been in this house all of 3 weeks. Retired horse rancher, moved out from Wyoming looking for peace and a lake view. Thought I'd found heaven. 2 acres, private shoreline, and room to breathe. My horses were still in a temporary paddock, pacing like prisoners in a county jail. So I bought supplies and spent the morning hammering in fence posts, old-school style, boots, sweat, and elbow grease. Felt good. Then Beverly showed up with the tone of a TSA agent who just found toothpaste in your carry-on. "Excuse me, sir. I'm Beverly Langford, president of the Maple Hollow HOA, and what you're doing is absolutely unacceptable." She pointed at my pine fence like I'd built a gallows. I introduced myself politely, told her I had permits, and even offered to show them. She gave those documents less attention than a teenager gives vegetables. She wasn't having it. Told me with a straight face that a structure like this, and I quote, endangers the aesthetic harmony of the community. Aesthetic harmony? My fence was 3 feet tall, made of natural wood and barely visible from the road. Meanwhile, her house looked like Versailles threw up on a cul-de-sac. White columns, gold fixtures, and a bird bath shaped like a cherub playing the violin. But sure, my fence was the eyesore. She got louder, which I've noticed is the HOA version of doubling down. Then she did the thing. Pulled out her phone like it was a badge and told me she was calling the police. "We'll let law enforcement explain what's allowed in this neighborhood," she said, lips pursed like a lemon wedge. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her dial with more theater than Broadway. See, here's the funny thing about people who threaten with authority. They usually don't understand it. 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulls up. Young female officer steps out, already looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. I explain my side, show her the permits, she reads them and says, "Yep, everything checks out. Plain, simple, lawful." Beverly's mouth dropped like I'd just told her she owed me rent. She started stammering something about community standards and property values, but the cop just nodded politely and told me to call again if I had any trouble. Beverly, realizing her power play had fizzled, went nuclear. "The HOA will be issuing a $5,000 0-cents fine for this violation," she shouted like she was reading a royal decree. Slammed the SUV door and peeled off like she was escaping justice. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with someone drunk on power, I was dealing with someone who thought she owned the whole lake. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the paperwork that came with the property, trying to make sure I hadn't missed some fine print curse about invisible HOA overlords. That's when I found it. Stuffed in an old manila folder was a 1989 survey report. Looked boring at first, property lines, measurements, lawyer handwriting. But then I read something that made my eyebrows jump. Lakefront ownership extends 210 feet into shore. I read it twice, then a third time. If this was legit, it meant I didn't just own a slice of lakeside real estate. I might actually own the lake shore, the one with the boat dock, the community beach, the one Beverly uses every Saturday for her HOA picnics. And I thought to myself, sometimes karma isn't a punch, it's a deed with a boundary line. Some people dig for dirt, I dig for deeds, and what I found in that old manila folder didn't just make my day, it made my case. That survey from 1989 wasn't just ink on paper, it was a quiet little bombshell that said my property extended 210 feet into what the HOA had been calling community shoreline. You ever get that feeling where your hands shake? Not from fear, but from the kind of power you weren't even looking for? That was me, sitting at my kitchen table, holding a map that might just unravel a decade of HOA bluffing. The same map that would have made the previous owners sleep a whole lot better if they hadn't been bullied out of here first. Stick with me, 'cause this story doesn't just twist, it turns heads. The next morning, I woke up to a fluorescent yellow notice taped to my front door like a passive-aggressive love letter. Emergency HOA meeting. Same day, 6 p.m. Purpose? To address urgent violations of community standards by new residents. They didn't even bother to hide it. I read it while sipping my coffee, shook my head, and said out loud, "They're really gonna try it." I spent the day not panicking, but preparing, gathering every document I had, printing a few extra copies, and highlighting key lines like a lawyer with highlighters on clearance. If Beverly wanted to play courtroom, I'd bring the closing argument, and maybe a surprise or two. Because when someone invites you to a public ambush, the least you can do is arrive over-prepared. Curious how they'd react? Good. You should be. That evening, the community center looked like it was hosting a reality TV reunion. Neighbors everywhere, whispering, glancing, pointing. You could practically smell the gossip rising off the folding chairs. Beverly was front and center, flanked by her usual entourage. Clipboard Nancy on one side, a guy in a golf shirt with security vibes on the other. When she called the meeting to order, her tone was part royal decree, part disappointed kindergarten teacher. She launched into this monologue about how fences divide more than property and how livestock disturb the peace and tranquility of Maple Hollow. I waited, calm, arms crossed, folder in hand. She gestured at me like I was the villain in a community theater play. "Mr. Mitchell, would you care to explain yourself?" Oh, Beverly. That's the moment I knew I had her. Keep watching? I stood up, walked to the front, and didn't shout. I didn't puff my chest. I just laid the folder on the table like it weighed more than her HOA rules. "First off," I said, "my horses are quieter than the garbage truck that comes every Thursday, and they haven't disturbed anyone unless the problem is they exist." A few chuckles broke the room's tension. Then I pulled out the county permits for the fence, passed them to Nancy, and watched her eye twitch while scanning the legally binding lines. But more importantly, I continued, I found something interesting in the purchase paperwork. A 1989 survey showing that my property doesn't end where the HOA map says it does. The room got quiet, like someone had hit mute. It appears, I added slowly, that the so-called community lakefront may fall, well, inside my backyard. Intrigued yet? You should be. You could hear the mental brakes screeching in half the room. Beverly's face tightened like a vice. But Greg Monroe, older guy, longtime resident, used to own a welding shop, spoke up from the third row. "I always wondered why that shoreline never lined up with the county plat. Maybe it's time we got some answers." I looked at him, nodded, and added, "I'm not making accusations. Yet. I'm just suggesting we look into it before this HOA starts issuing $5,000 0-cent fines over fences that might be legally guarding my beach." Now that got murmurs. Beverly tried to steer the meeting back, but the tide had turned. People weren't just looking at her anymore. They were looking at me, and not with anger, but curiosity, suspicion, hope. I didn't raise my voice, but I did raise the stakes. And the next move, that was going to be mine. Don't blink. It only gets better from here. If Petty had a power tool, Beverly just hired it. I woke up to the sound of buzzing that didn't belong to a bird, a bee, or any part of nature I respected. Looked out my window and saw a man with a chainsaw slicing clean through the fence I'd spent 2 days building. My fence. on my land, with permits that even the county had stamped like it was a golden ticket. Another guy was tossing the planks into the back of a pickup like he was collecting souvenirs from a war zone, and who was standing off to the side, pointing with the arrogance of royalty? Beverly Langford, in designer sunglasses and a smug expression so thick it could have blocked sunlight? That's when I realized we weren't in a dispute anymore. We were in a turf war, with hedge clippers and delusions of grandeur. I threw on boots and grabbed my phone faster than a teenager spotting Wi-Fi, started recording as I stormed out the front door. "You're trespassing," I said flatly, "and this is all being documented." The man with the chainsaw paused, like he'd just realized this wasn't demolition day at the junkyard. He looked at Beverly for backup, and she, without missing a beat, turned toward me like she was unveiling a new feature at a press conference. "Mr. Mitchell, I regret to inform you that your fence was a safety hazard. The HOA has taken emergency action to protect the neighborhood." Then she handed me a printed invoice for $8,000, 0 cents, for unauthorized fence removal and urgent community safeguarding. I stared at it like it was a tax bill from outer space. The audacity? Breathtaking. The grammar? Flawless. The legality? Non-existent. But stay tuned. It gets better. Within minutes, Officer Daniels arrived again. Same weary expression. Same no-nonsense tone. "Got another call," she said, eyes flicking from Beverly's smug posture to my raised phone. I handed her my permits again and hit play on the video I just took of the crew, slicing through my property like it was a piñata. Beverly launched into another one of her HOA monologues, this time throwing in words like emergency access, fire lanes, and preventive protocol, like she was narrating a FEMA training video. Officer Daniels wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Langford, I'll need to see written authorization proving you have the right to order property demolition." Beverly reached into her oversized tote like she was pulling out a Declaration of Independence, but produced nothing but fluff. No court order, no city permit, just the HOA's internal guidelines printed on fancy letterhead. It was a performance with no script, which meant the curtain was about to drop. Officer Daniels told the crew to stop immediately. They looked relieved, like they'd been waiting for someone to say it. One of them gave me an apologetic nod, while another quietly peeled the invoice out of my hand. But the damage was done. My fence was scattered in pieces, my horses were spooked, and my patience had just expired. As Beverly stormed off, mumbling about next Tuesday's compliance review, Greg Monroe walked up from next door holding 2 coffees like he'd just witnessed a slow-moving train wreck. "Same thing happened to the family before you," he said, handing me a cup. "Beverly nitpicked them to death. Garden, mailbox, wind chimes. They finally sold and left. You're just the latest project." I looked out over my splintered fence line and made a decision right then. I wasn't going anywhere. If she thought I'd fold, she picked the wrong cowboy. That night, I drove into town and dropped a small fortune on the kind of security camera setup that could monitor a penguin in a snowstorm. Motion sensors, cloud backup, night vision, the works. If Beverly wanted to play dirty, I was about to turn this into a documentary. When I got back, I installed cameras on every corner of my property, like a rancher marking territory in pixels. Then I picked up the phone and called the number Greg had slipped me earlier for a property attorney with a reputation nastier than a rattlesnake in a mailbox. Because if this HOA wanted to fight, it was going to be the kind they didn't train for in board meetings. And let me tell you, Beverly had the chainsaws, but I had receipts. You won't believe what came next. Keep watching. Beverly wanted a showdown. I brought a lawman. His name was Carl Davis. Silver hair, navy blazer, and the calm intensity of someone who's made a career out of turning paperwork into power. He didn't posture or pontificate. He read, thoroughly, slowly, like he was savoring every legal landmine tucked inside that 1989 survey I handed him. I watched his eyebrows lift halfway through page 3, and by page 6, he looked like a man who had just discovered buried treasure in a backyard lawsuit. "Mr. Mitchell," he said with a grin so dry it could sand wood, "if this document holds up, and I believe it will. You don't just own the shoreline. You own the dock, the boat ramp, and that little island the HOA uses for summer barbecues. You're saying I own the HOA's party island? He nodded, every wet inch of it. Oh, Beverly, your tiki torch days might be numbered. Carl spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing the survey with county plats, tax documents, and land registry data so old it looked like it had been printed on parchment. When he was done, he sat back in his chair and said, "They've been trespassing for years. And the HOA? It's been running its summer fun on borrowed land." I wasn't sure whether to be angry or impressed. What kind of confidence does it take to host volleyball tournaments on property you don't legally control? That's like throwing a wedding in someone else's living room and charging them for the cake. But hey, now that I knew the truth, it was time to stop playing defense. Carl suggested we draft a formal notice of ownership and call a community-wide meeting. Not an ambush, a reveal, because when you've got the deed, you don't shout, you schedule. By the time I posted flyers for the emergency community meeting, the neighborhood grapevine was already boiling. People walking their dogs slowed down in front of my driveway like they were hoping to hear spoilers. Beverly must have seen one of the notices within hours because I caught her pacing on her front lawn like a general sensing mutiny. For the first time, she wasn't storming my yard, she was guarding hers. That's when I knew the narrative had shifted. She'd spent years playing Queen Bee, but now she wasn't sure who held the hive. I didn't need to knock on doors. Curiosity was doing the job for me. Every neighbor with a lawn chair and a rumor to chase was already marking their calendar. And Beverly? She wasn't panicking out loud yet, but let's just say her garage door opened 4 times in one afternoon, and she wasn't getting groceries. Carl and I prepared like we were going to court. He drafted a clean, professional briefing complete with certified maps, notary stamps, and historical records that looked like they'd been pulled from the vault at Fort Knox. Me? I practiced my delivery. Not to grandstand, but to stay calm. You see, people don't trust rage. They trust resolve. Especially when it's wrapped in facts, logic, and the quiet satisfaction of someone who just realized they owned the land under the bully's throne. Carl called it a strategic realignment of property expectations. I called it a wake-up call with a paper trail. We printed enough copies for every attendee. Nothing makes HOA panic like a well-organized folder. The night before the meeting, I walked the edge of my property with a flashlight, stopping by the old barbecue pit on that now not-so-public island. Funny thing about ownership, it doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's quiet, buried, waiting for the right set of eyes and the wrong kind of enemy to bring it to life. Beverly thought I was just a guy with horses and a fence. What she didn't know, I owned the whole rodeo, and by this time tomorrow, so would everyone else. Stick around. Because when this meeting starts, the real fun begins. If you found this story helpful, or if it hit a little too close to home, go ahead and send it to a friend who might be dealing with their own version of Beverly and the HOA circus. Nobody should have to face petty power plays alone. And if you've ever tangled with an HOA yourself, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think of this one. They came for a scolding. I brought a surprise ending. When I walked into that community meeting at Maple Hall, I didn't walk in angry. I walked in ready. Carl was beside me, carrying the kind of leather folder that makes people sweat before it's even opened. The room was full, buzzing louder than a barbershop on gossip day. Lawn chair lawyers, HOA loyalists, curious neighbors. It was standing room only, and at the front of it all, Beverly Langford stood tall, lips pressed into a line that said, "I'm still in charge," but eyes that flickered every time someone looked past her and toward me. She had her entourage, I had my documents. She had drama, I had evidence. You could feel it. The tide wasn't turning. It had already turned. They just didn't know it yet. Stay with me. This part's the pivot. Beverly opened the meeting like she was running a trial, her voice sharp and righteous, accusing me of spreading confusion, threatening neighborhood integrity, and other phrases plucked straight from a HOA horror script. She even pulled out color photos of the shoreline with little red arrows and words like violation scribbled in bold. It was like watching a magician pull endless scarves out of a hat, except the hat was empty and the scarves were all made of noise. When she finally paused, waiting for the room to cheer or clap or gasp, I stood up slowly and thanked her. That alone got a few chuckles. Then Carl opened the folder. The real show had just begun. Carl didn't shout, he didn't accuse, he simply laid out the facts, like a seasoned teacher explaining to a class why 2 + 2 is still 4, even if the HOA says otherwise. He passed around copies of certified tax records showing that not only had the HOA never paid taxes on the lakefront, they'd been operating on land taxed to me and the previous owner for decades. "You can't claim what you never paid for," Carl said with a smile that felt more like a scalpel. The room went quiet. You could practically hear Beverly's pulse spike. One by one, heads started turning toward her, not with fear, but with questions. And questions, my friend, are what topple empires built on paperwork and pride. Stick around. This twist is worth it. Now here's where most folks would go in for the kill, sue the HOA, fence off the dock, charge Beverly rent just to stand near the water. But I didn't want vengeance. I wanted something that lasted longer than a fine or a court win. So I stepped forward, cleared my throat, and told the crowd what I planned to do. "I'm not here to take anything away," I said. "I'm here to give it back the right way." I announced that I'd be transforming the entire lakefront, dock, beach, and island into a public nature preserve, free, forever, managed by a rotating neighborhood board where every resident gets a voice. No more HOA thrones, just shared stewardship. That room didn't erupt, it lifted. People clapped, nodded, even stood. You could see relief wash over faces like sun breaking through storm clouds. And Beverly? She didn't shout this time. She sat, slowly, like someone who realized the crown she wore was made of printer paper and empty threats. Her little empire had run on fear, but fear was gone now. What replaced it was unity, and something better. Truth. I didn't need her approval. I didn't want her apology. All I wanted was for the community to see what it looked like when a neighbor actually acted neighborly. She built a throne out of bylaws. I gave it back to the people. And we were just getting started. Stick around for the next part, because when bullies lose power, they usually don't go quiet. They go reckless. When they come for your garden, you know they've lost the argument. I walked outside one morning and found my entire vegetable bed shredded like it had survived a tornado, made of bitterness and pettiness. Tomato vines ripped up, beanstalks snapped, irrigation lines chewed through like licorice at a sleepover. It wasn't raccoons. This wasn't nature's doing. This was personal and loud in its silence. My garden wasn't just food, it was peace. Therapy with dirt. And now it looked like someone had declared war on zucchini. I didn't panic. I didn't yell. I walked straight to my security console, rewound the footage, and there she was, Nancy Ridge, clipboard queen of passive aggression, tearing through my vegetables at 2:06 a.m. with gloves and giggles. Somewhere between the tomatoes and the cucumbers, she even stopped to take a selfie. Stick around, it gets worse before it gets delicious. The next day, like clockwork, I got a formal-looking envelope in the mailbox. Big HOA logo up top, dramatic bold print. Environmental hazard notification. According to this fine piece of fiction, my garden was in violation of the newly formed Maple Hollow Environmental Preservation Subcommittee. Apparently, non-native plants like carrots and kale were now threats to the ecosystem. I was being fined $10,000, 0 cents, and ordered to remove all vegetation immediately or face legal action. Oh, and guess whose name was signed at the bottom? Nancy Ridge, chairwoman. Creative. I'll give them that. But not bright. The kind of scheme that's got more drama than logic. It's like robbing a bank and posting it to Facebook. Entertaining, but dumb. But hold tight. This next part's the payoff. The following community meeting was packed like a church potluck with free pie. People smelled smoke and came for the fire. Beverly was seated front and center, Nancy beside her looking smug with a manila folder like it held state secrets. I waited until Beverly launched into a speech about sustainability, ecological responsibility, and unregulated flora. Nancy followed up with photos of my destroyed garden, framing it like an abandoned landfill. That's when I stood up, walked to the projector, and calmly said, "I think we should look at the real environmental footage." I played the security video. Nancy's midnight gardening spree filled the screen. Her face, her laugh, her hands yanking roots like she was harvesting bad decisions. You could hear gasps. One guy even dropped his coffee. It was poetic. It was justice on a flash drive. When the video ended, the room didn't explode. It froze, the kind of silence that happens when people finally see what they've only suspected. Nancy stammered, tried to spin it as evidence collection, said she was documenting potential violations. But her grin on camera said otherwise. The crowd wasn't buying it. And Beverly? She didn't blink, didn't defend, just sat there like the captain of a ship, watching her first mate confess to sinking the lifeboat. The tension was thick enough to spread on toast. That's when Greg Monroe stood up and said what most of us were thinking. If this is what they're doing to a man's tomatoes, imagine what else they've tried to bury. And let me tell you, the look on Beverly's face? That was the look of a throne cracking under its own weight. But don't walk away yet. There's still another hammer coming. Later that night, Nancy called me directly, voice shaking, said she was willing to come clean, admitted Beverly told her to send a message by hitting the garden, said she didn't know it would get this far. I told her I appreciated the honesty, but that truth isn't something you whisper after the damage. It's what you say before you follow orders. Still, it was something. And something was all I needed to build the next move. Turns out, when the carrots disappear, the cowards appear. You won't believe what happens next. And Beverly sure didn't see it coming. Keep watching. I brought facts to a feelings fight, and let me tell you, nothing rattles a self-declared authority figure faster than paperwork, with signatures, dates, and little red stamps from the county clerk's office. The final survey came in that morning, 30 crisp pages, confirming what we already suspected. I didn't just own a slice of the shoreline, I owned all 230 feet of it. Dock, beach, picnic tables, volleyball court, and yes, that island Beverly once called the jewel of the HOA. Turns out the jewel was in my safe this whole time. Carl just smiled as he reviewed the results. "Game over," he said, flipping the last page like a mic drop. But me, I wasn't interested in bragging. I was interested in closure, and maybe a little poetic justice, served cool with notarized backing. That evening's meeting felt different. Not tense, expectant. Like the whole neighborhood could sense that something big was about to land, and they wanted front row seats to history. Beverly came armed with her usual dramatics and a brand new lawyer in tow. Slick suit, slicker hair, and the confidence of someone who's used to getting paid win or lose. When Carl and I walked in with a portable projector, a stack of certified documents, and a quiet kind of calm, you could feel the shift. It was no longer us proving ourselves. It was them trying to outrun the truth. And spoiler alert, truth has better shoes. Stick around. This next part's pure gold. Beverly's attorney tried to run the classic adverse use defense, claimed the HOA had maintained and used the facilities for years without objection, so they had claim to them. Carl waited for him to finish, then pulled out the tax records like a magician revealing the final card. "Your client never paid a dime in property taxes on that land," he said, voice low but steady. "Mr. Mitchell, and the previous owner, paid every year. You don't get to squat on someone else's dock for 20 years and then cry ownership." You could almost hear the collective mental gears turning. People started whispering, shifting. Even the lawyer looked like he wanted to evaporate. The silence afterward wasn't awkward. It was reverent. like the room had just watched a masterclass in calm demolition. That's when Beverly cracked, stood up, red-faced, voice cracking like a dropped dish. "This is an ambush. The HOA has always acted in good faith. We did the work. We cleaned up the shoreline, maintained the island." She turned to the crowd, trying to rally them like a coach in the fourth quarter. But the crowd wasn't with her, not anymore. Her kingdom of fines and threats had lost its voice, and all it took was a map, a tax ledger, and a neighbor who refused to roll over. I stood up, let the moment settle, and spoke clearly. "I'm not closing off the lake. I'm not building walls or charging fees, but I am making it clear that this land won't be weaponized by HOA rules ever again. Use it, enjoy it, respect it, but no more HOA control." And the room? It exhaled. As we packed up, I caught glimpses of something I hadn't seen in weeks. Smiles. People weren't just relieved, they were inspired. Not because I'd won, but because I hadn't rubbed it in. I'd stood up with facts instead of fury, and somehow that seemed to matter. It showed them that power doesn't have to roar, it can simply stand. Beverly left without another word, her lawyer trailing behind like a balloon losing helium. She built fences of fear. I tore them down with facts. But hang tight. Because the next morning, her final play was just desperate enough to leave one last mess behind, and I was more than ready to clean it up. They came with handcuffs, but not for me. I was out front trimming the last edge of my newly replanted garden when Officer Daniels pulled up, lights off, but purpose loud. She stepped out with that familiar sigh she reserves for paperwork that turns into headlines, and gave me a nod before heading across the street. And there she was, Beverly Langford, standing on her porch in that same HOA-issued superiority she wore like a badge. But this time the badge came from the county sheriff's office. Criminal destruction of property, conspiracy to commit vandalism. Nancy Ridge had already flipped. Turns out even clipboard loyalty has a breaking point when a courtroom's involved. Watching Beverly get walked down those porch steps was like watching a parade in reverse. No applause, just long overdue justice. Stay with me. It wasn't just a fall, it was a shift. Nancy was arrested later that same afternoon. Less drama, more dread. She came out with her notebook still clutched in one hand like she was hoping to jot down an escape plan, but no amount of bullet points was going to rewrite the footage, the fines, or the fingerprints on my uprooted tomato patch. And once those two went down, the rest followed like dominoes built on hot air. The HOA board, Beverly's loyal circle of finger-waggers, resigned one by one, claiming everything from emotional stress to unfair targeting, which is rich considering their favorite sport had been targeting everyone else. No one marched for them, no one wrote letters, and the funny thing, no one missed them. You could feel it. The neighborhood breathed deeper, lighter, like it had been wearing a too-tight collar for years and someone finally unbuttoned the top. Within weeks, the transformation was visible. The nature preserve wasn't just a feel-good speech. It came alive. Families showed up with picnic baskets and folding chairs, kids played by the shore, and Greg Monroe organized weekend cleanups without a single fine or form involved. My garden bounced back with a little neighborly help, some seeds, some sweat, and a whole lot of kindness that had been waiting for a reason to bloom. People started waving again, talking again, like neighbors, like humans. A new HOA was formed, smaller, transparent, and shockingly functional. Its first rule? No weaponizing bylaws. Its second? Every resident gets a vote on shoreline decisions. Turns out when fear moves out, fairness moves in, and folks actually liked that. Stick around, there's still a twist. One morning I got a letter, not a summons, not a fine, just a note from another lake community 2 towns over, asking if I'd be willing to share my story. Apparently they had their own Beverly, and folks were looking for a new playbook. I smiled reading it, because sometimes justice doesn't just land. It travels, it teaches. What started as offense turned into a ripple effect of reform. And if my war with the clipboard mafia could help someone else avoid the same mess, that felt like a win worth passing on. And as much as I'd never planned on being the accidental face of HOA rebellion, I'd take it if it meant a few more people got to sleep easier at night. She called the cops on my fence. I called the county on her empire, and somehow we both ended up building something. But only one of us built it to last. If you found this story helpful, or if it reminded you of someone wrestling with the same kind of neighborhood nonsense, send it to them. Share the lesson, not just the laughs. And if you've been through something similar, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story, because the only thing louder than petty power is the sound of people standing up to it, together. And as I sat there on my back porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees and the lake ripple like it finally knew peace, I realized something. This whole mess, every fight, every threat, every shovel of petty revenge, had been a gift wrapped in chaos. I didn't just reclaim my land. I reclaimed my voice. I didn't just tear down their fences. I built bridges with my neighbors, with the truth, with anyone who's ever been told to stay quiet and comply. The preserve now carries my name, but the victory, that belongs to every person who's ever looked at a crooked system and said, "Not today." You see, this wasn't a story about land. It was about standing your ground when someone tries to erase it. It was about choosing facts over fear, purpose over pettiness, and community over control. Beverly thought the rules were her throne, but rules without fairness are just tools for bullies. And once you learn how to read them, you can use those same tools to dismantle the whole crooked platform. That's the real lesson here. Justice isn't loud, it's steady, it's smart. And sometimes it's a quiet man with a folder full of receipts and a garden full of second chances. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone standing up against the odds, or brought a little clarity to your own chaos, do me a favor. Share it with a friend. Send it to someone dealing with their own HOA drama or local injustice. Let them know they're not alone. Leave a comment below and tell me what part hit you hardest. And if you want more real, wild, and meaningful stories like this one, stories about power, truth, and poetic payback, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because around here, we don't just tell stories, we deliver reminders that smart still beats loud, that calm can conquer chaos, and that the truth, once planted, grows into something bigger than any fence could ever contain.